a few comments concerning the difference between the Black Revolution and the Negro Revolution. There's a difference. Are they both the same? And if they're not, what is the difference? What is the difference between a Black Revolution and a Negro Revolution? First, what is a revolution? Sometimes I'm inclined to believe that many of our people are using this word revolution without taking careful consideration what this word actually means and what its historic characteristics are. When you study the historic nature of revolutions, the motive of a revolution, the objective of a revolution, and the result of a revolution, and the methods used in a revolution, you may change words. You may devise another program. You may change your goal and you may change your mind. Look at the American Revolution in 1776. That revolution was for what? For land. How was it? Why did they want land? Independence. How was it carried out? Bloodshed. Number one, it was based on land. The basis of independence. And the only way they could get it was bloodshed. The French Revolution, what was it based on? Against the landlord. What was it for? Land. How did they get it? Bloodshed. Was no love lost. Was no compromise. Was no negotiation. I'm telling you, you don't know what a revolution is. Because when you find out what it is, you'll get back in the alley. You'll get out of the way. Come on in. The Russian Revolution. What was it based on? Land. The landless against the landlord. You haven't got a revolution that doesn't involve bloodshed. And you're afraid to bleed. I said you're afraid to bleed. Long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific, the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time to seeing your own churches being bombed and little black girls murdered, you haven't got no blood. You bleed when the white man says bleed. You bite when the white man says bite. And you bark when the white man says bark. I hate to say this about us. I'll be nonviolent in Mississippi as violent as you were in Korea. How can you justify being nonviolent in Mississippi and Alabama when your churches are being bombed and your little girls are being murdered, and at the same time you're going to get violent with Hitler and Tojo and somebody else that you don't even know? Violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong defending black women and black children and black babies and black men, then it's wrong for America to draft us and make us violent abroad in defense of her. The Chinese Revolution. They wanted land. They British out, along with the Uncle Tom Chinese. Yeah, they did. They set a good example. When I was in prison, I read an article, and don't be shocked when I say I was in prison. You're still in prison. That's what America means, prison. When I was in prison, I read an article in Life magazine showing a little Chinese girl, 9 years old. Her father was on his hands and knees, and she was pulling the trigger because he was an Uncle Tom in China. When they had the revolution over there, they took a whole generation of Uncle Toms, just wiped them out. And within 10 years, that little girl became a full-grown woman. No more Toms in China. And today it's one of the toughest, roughest, most feared countries on this earth by the white man, because there are no Uncle Toms over there. Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward all research. And when you see that you got problems, all you have to do is examine the historic method used all over the world by others who had problems similar to yours. And once you see how they got theirs straight, then you know how you can get yours straight. There's been a revolution, a black revolution going on in Africa. In Kenya, the Mau Mau were revolutionaries. They were the ones who brought it to the fore. The Mau Mau, they were revolutionaries. They believed in the earth. They knocked everything aside that got in their path. And their revolution also was based on land, a desire for land. In Algeria, the northern part of Africa, a revolution took place. The Algerians were revolutionists. They wanted land. France offered to let them be integrated into France. They told France to hell with France. They wanted France. And they engaged in a bloody battle. So I cite these various revolutions, brothers and sisters, to show you, you don't have a peaceful revolution. You don't have a turn the other cheek revolution. There's no such thing as a non-violent revolution. Only kind of revolution that's non-violent is the Negro revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro revolution. The only revolution in which the goal is a desegregated lunch counter, a desegregated theater, a desegregated park, and a desegregated public toilet. You can sit down next to white folks on the toilet. That's no revolution. Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. The white man knows what a revolution is. He knows that the black revolution is worldwide, in scope and in nature. The black revolution is sweeping Asia, sweeping Africa. It's rearing its head in Latin America. The Cuban Revolution, that's a revolution. They overturned the system. Revolution is in Asia. Revolution is in Africa. And the white man is screaming because he sees revolution in Latin America. How do you think he'll react to you when you learn what a real revolution is?
Okay, you guys, I wanted to play that because I felt that it actually tied into the subject today. And I want to discuss Uncle Tom's Cabin because this book has framed a lot of dialogue in the Black community. Um, and it's interesting to me that words that whites come up with to describe Blacks are words that we use in the community to describe traits of each other. And I don't know, I was asking the chat, some of you have read the novel, some of you haven't, but I just want to go over the characters in the novel really quickly. And I want to explain to you why I feel Sambo and Uncle Tom were villains, and why I feel almost every Black person, I would argue every slave that was portrayed in that book, were exactly the type of Black people that whites are comfortable with, but not the type of Black people that Malcolm X just described in that speech. And I'm going to justify that as I go along. So let me go ahead, and I think we all can agree that Sambo was a villain, right? He was in love with his master. He was willing to torture other slaves for him. He had no loyalty to his people whatsoever. He was violent toward his people, the whole nine, right? So I think most people would agree that Sambo um, was a villain, right? Very few people would disagree with that. What was interesting to me is Sambo is not the character that Black people despised from that book. And the book was written in 1852. So to put this in perspective, this was toward the close of slavery, and the refusal to embrace Uncle Tom is understandable. It's understandable why many Blacks chose Uncle Tom as a villain, and we adopted the language of calling people Uncle Toms in a negative connotation. In recent history, we've heard Black people come forth and say Uncle Tom was not the villain, Sambo was the villain. But I would argue there is a reason that historically we have said Uncle Tom was the villain, and Uncle Tom has been used as an insult. And I'm going to get into why right now. So there are several main characters in the book, and we're going to be working through them. I'm going to start with Uncle Tom and Sambo first. Like I said, Sambo, I think we all can agree he was a villain. He was monstrous. He was literally like a white person painted Black. And he tortured the other slaves. He had no loyalty to his people on any level, right? With that said, Uncle Tom was the hero in the book. Now, mind you, this book was written by a white woman, Harriet Stowe, and these are how she portrayed the characters, right? So Uncle Tom was who she felt was the hero in the book. And he was a gentle slave. He did not push back against slavery. He had a heart for his people, so he would help them, but he would only help them within the confines of his slavery, right? He was a devout Christian. You guys know I'm Christian, so I'm not going to knock that, but he was a devout Christian. And even when there were slaves that wanted to rebel, and this is why I call him a villain, Uncle Tom would quell those feelings in them, teach them to be peaceful. This would be like what Malcolm X described, the difference between a Negro and a Black person, right? People would say Martin Luther King was a Negro, right? His ideology was to work with, he was like Uncle Tom, right? His ideology was to work with the slave master. His ideology was to live alongside. His ideology was to be peaceful and nonviolent. This is very similar to Uncle Tom in the book. You can imagine when this book was written, with all the atrocities happening to our people and the 100 years of lynching that followed. And we've gone through the timeline in the past few videos, but we know that the 100 years of lynching that followed, then Jim Crow, then the 70s, and I'm going to be doing a piece on why the 70s let white people know that they still had to have control over blacks, because in the 70s, we had no apologies for the words that came out of our mouth. So I will be doing a video on how the face of the black man has changed from the 70s and 80s slowly into the present day, which is a non-threatening black person who is not, just as Uncle Tom was not, who is not comfortable with violence, who is not comfortable with coercive force for the use of their people. And the same arguments that we have today are the same arguments that our people have been having since the beginning of slavery. And I found it interesting that to the white woman that wrote this book, the hero, Uncle Tom, was a non-threatening, kind, loving black man who would never inflict violence, who was pious in every way, who would never harm anyone, not white, not black. That was the white man's version of a heroic black man. Non-threatening, non-violent, peaceful toward his enemy, but still loving his people. And that is why our early ancestors used Uncle Tom as a derogatory term. Because clearly, in the years following the writing of this book, the idea, as Malcolm X said in his speech, of not pushing back with violence when violence was being used on you was a hard one for some people to grasp. You heard Brother Malcolm speaking, saying that in China, they killed all the Uncle Toms. And now China is one of the countries, or one of the nations here on this earth, one of the countries on this earth that is greatly feared by white society. We know this to be true. North Korea is working its way up too. There is a fear there. There is a reason we don't mess with China. There is a reason we'll send troops to everywhere else, but we're not playing in China, because there is a fear there. As Malcolm said, there are no Uncle Toms in China. They got rid of them all. They don't allow those kinds of mindsets. The people there are prepared to use force to protect themselves. And this is something that he pointed out with the examples of the many revolutions that have occurred. Something I want to discuss in my upcoming videos are conversations about how we have failed as a people in promoting revolutionary action to our benefit. And I want to tie that into my series where I talk about revolution and its social causes, and reiterate the point that revolutions happen in waves, not all at once. I'll be playing a lot of visual footage for you guys, because I think when you see hundreds of thousands of Black people all screaming Black power, which is something we have never seen in our lifetimes, many of us, it will put a different perspective on why 40, 50 years ago, there was an aggressive attack to destroy the Black community, because actions like that were scary and could never be tolerated. We often think of civil rights as something that was happening only here in the United States, when it was a global thing. There were Black Panthers all around the world. There were activists that were unified in their Blackness throughout the world at the time. And there was a worldwide effort to crush that. They had Blacks coming on TV on these shows who were talking violence openly. And we move forward to the present day, and we're on there taking paternity tests and beating each other up and looking like fools. There's a reason for that. So going back to the book, I would argue that Uncle Tom was a villain because, as Brother Malcolm said in his speech that we played at the beginning of this live, he was a Negro. He was passive. He was the hero to the white woman that wrote that book. The non-threatening, non-violent, ever-forgiving, complacent, compliant, not to ever break the rules, but still loved his people, Black man. And his counterpart, that we often call the villain now, Sambo, is truly a villain too. But at least he was honest in his betrayal. Instead of unknowing in his own heart and goodness that he was in fact betraying his people with his actions. I think that's something that we often overlook about that story, at least in my opinion. I know there's at least one person, because I was in the chat with you guys earlier, I'm not now, in the chat, who automatically disagreed with me just off of the title. I want to go to George Harris because it's interesting to me the slave characters that this white woman portrayed. And it's only interesting to me because in the Black community, we use her language and the character she created as insults towards each other. So when collectively my people are using the words of a white woman to bash each other, I stop and I become interested in everything that she wrote about our people in her book. And so she has another character she wrote about. His name is George Harris. And he is described as talented and inventive. He managed to escape slavery, and he was used as a shining example of how well integrated Black people could be into white society. He endured all kinds of violence and cruelty, but he simply went on to escape with his wife and move out of the country because he wanted to be equal to whites, but he didn't want to pass as a white person. What's important to realize is that every beautiful woman this white woman portrayed in this book was a mulatto or a quadroon or an octoroon. George Harris himself, the one slave that she chose to use as a shining example of how well Blacks could be integrated into society, was capable of passing for white. That's how he escaped, is that he could pass for white. And that's a reoccurring theme in the book. And so I would argue that George Harris is not a good character either, because the witty, the intelligent Black that could be well integrated was barely Black, and so was his wife. I want to look at Evangeline St. Clair. She is the heroine in the book. She is a white girl, full on virginal white purity, pale skin, halo of golden curls, blue eyes, capable of turning even the most disgusting, vile slave into a good person with her love. She was pursued by Uncle Tom in this book. He gave her presents and attempted to befriend her as she was a child. He looked up to her. The heroine in this book, the hero in this book, Uncle Tom looked up to this virtuous, pure, almost angelic white girl with the curly blonde hair and the blue eyes. Belying one more time that Uncle Tom is not a hero in this book. He is only a hero to the white community that this white woman wrote this book for. I want to talk more about Eva because she has an influence on another character in this book called Topsy. Now, Topsy is one of the black characters in this book, right? The full-on black character. She is unattractive. She is ugly. She has been brutalized extremely. She is wicked. She is all things, and every stereotype that is negative about blacks is embodied in this character. And she is saved by Eva, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, virginal, angelic young girl. All of the beatings couldn't save her. Nothing could be done to make her act right. She was near barbaric, but one day Eva ran to her and told her that she loved her, and the love of that blonde-haired, blue-eyed white girl was all that it took to root something in Topsy's heart that allowed her to become civilized and well-behaved. Again, Topsy is another character who did not outright rebel. You will notice a theme here. None of the slaves exacted violence, and every time they thought of being violent, they thought of Eva, the blonde-haired, blue-eyed, angelic, virginal, perfect. These are not my ideas. This is exactly how she was portrayed in the book. Soul, and they thought better of their violence. And then we have Cassie. Cassie is considered one of the beautiful slaves in the book. Again, mulatto, quadroon, octoroonish types. She has been brutalized. She even thinks about committing violence against the slave masters that are raping her, but she doesn't do it. She doesn't do it because her heart is softened. It's softened. It's softened, and she reconsiders her position. She is affected greatly by Uncle Tom, who convinces her to be peaceful, right? She's influenced by Uncle Tom's piety and his faith. And she even cares for Uncle Tom after he's been beaten. And the violence she wanted to enact is snuffed out by the influence that Uncle Tom has on her. Again, Uncle Tom being the hero of this book that was written by a white woman, constantly snuffing out the revolutionary minds and everyone he comes across with his subservience and his gentleness and his non-threatening and loving nature. So, with that said, there's another book, and I'm going to be putting the link to it. It was a book that was written by a slave, and I will put the link in the description box. It's not a book that you have to buy. The link will be to a PDF of the book that you can download and read on your own. And I would argue that that is the kind of book that we should look toward for a realistic view of slavery. You know, I'm of the opinion that whenever slavery is portrayed, white people should never be able to have the control over how it is portrayed. And I'll tell you why. Because I feel like they always get it wrong, right? If it were up to me whenever slavery was portrayed, the atrocities of slavery would be portrayed and slave revolts would be portrayed alongside them. And that would be the only way that I would ever present slavery if I had control over it. Again, I just find it fascinating that Uncle Tom's Cabin and the characters that this white woman created are the source of words we use for each other. Sambo, Uncle Time. That this white woman created. Oh, sorry. I came to look at the chat. But Sambo, Uncle Tom, all of those things. right? These are names we direct at each other. And I would argue that both of those characters and every other slave portrayed in that book was a poor example of Blackness. And that both of the main characters, Sambo and Uncle Tom, were villains because they lacked the one thing that Malcolm X spoke about in the speech that I played before we started this discussion, and that is the willingness to shed blood for the protection of themselves or their own. Every slave in that book was the same. And remember, this book was not written for us. This was written for white people to get them comfortable with the idea of freeing us in all of our barbarianism. So with that said, I want to open up the discussion a little bit. I'm going to be taking a look at your comments, and I'm just curious, do you think that what Brother Malcolm said is true, that there are Negroes and there are Black people? Well, Maximum Black, can you tell me when Sambo and Uncle Tom, those characters existed prior to her writing that book? Because it was a fictional novel. So Maximum, if you're saying that she is not the one that created those characters, even though she wrote the book, can you give me something that predates her book? I'm willing to accept that I'm wrong about this, but I find no mention of those characters and their stories prior to the book that she wrote. So Sigma Wolf said, I learned a long time ago that accidents don't happen anymore. Everything happens for a reason. Yes, it was planned out. And there have been other things like this book that have happened. Psychopatheist, did you listen to the whole live? I explained why I felt that he was a villain, but I will explain it again. Uncle Tom was passive and non-threatening, right? He is the creation of a white woman, and he is who she chose to be the hero slave in her book that she wrote. He was passive. He was non-threatening. He never retaliated against violence. If he knew of other slaves that wanted to be violent, he would help soothe their minds so that they too would be passive. Although he loved his people, he wanted to have, as Malcolm X called it, a Negro's attitude toward how to react, which was a peaceful, hopeful belief that everything would be okay. He refused to break the rules at all. And again, he soothed any revolutionary thought in the other slaves he encountered. There are several other characters in the book. There were several other slave characters in the book who wanted to commit violent acts against the whites that tortured them, and Uncle Tom essentially influenced them out of it. And so that's why I would say he's a different kind of villain, right? A different kind of villain. I saw a movie once where two girls were going to be sex slaves. I saw this a long time ago. And the older girl turned to the younger girl and she said, "Take these pills. They'll make you not care." Is she not a villain? Is she not similar to Uncle Tom? Just take these pills. Everything that's happening to you and will happen to you is vile. But just let it go. Just check out on it. Just don't care. Don't fight back. And that was Uncle Tom's attitude. And that would be my, because Black people always need a villain. In this book, everybody was a villain, right? That's what I would think. Can it be said that Uncle Tom had fatherly instincts? Sigma Wolf. Sigma Wolf, if you had a daughter and a man raped your daughter and two other men came with you, or if you had a man and a man rape your daughter and you were about to beat that man's head into the ground, let's say you had your hands on his neck and you're ready to smash his face into the ground because he had raped your daughter so violently that she could never bear children. Her face was puffy and bruised and broken. And another man came to you and said, "No, brother, just leave him be. Just be peaceful. Don't hurt him. It's okay." Who has the fatherly instinct? You, wanting to bash his head into the ground after he violated your daughter in a violent and brutal way? Or the man that wants to stop you? I guess that's subjective, right? Sigma Wolf, I would say that he did not have fatherly instincts. I would say that he was passive. That's what I would say. When I was in high school, Uncle Tom was any black male who considered himself white. Right, Paul, but I don't think that's how it started out, right? I don't think that's how it started out. I think, remember, this book was written during slavery, right? This was written at the end of slavery. So I think initially when our people used the term Uncle Tom, it had to do with his passivity. And I think because so many people didn't read the book, over time, the meaning of Uncle Tom was lost. However, Brother Malcolm X, in the speech that I played when we started this live, he hearkened back to the original meaning of Uncle Tom, which was a passive Black person, or Negro as he called them, that refused to use force in a situation that called for force. And I think, Paul, that was probably the way our ancestors historically thought about it. And then the term got perverted over the time. And now in the modern day, a lot of people feel that you should only say Sambo and not use Uncle Tom. I would argue, not that I would be on board necessarily with using either, but if I were on board with it, I would use Sambo and Uncle Tom depending on who I was talking about. But you guys know I'm not really so much for calling each other names, especially not names from a book that a white woman wrote during slavery. Like, I'm good on that. Audio is crediting Father George McGuire, the chaplain of Marcus Garvey, to use Uncle Tom's name in a negative light. I might give you that audio. I can't verify that, but I do know that white people always use Uncle Tom in a positive way, right? Because in the book that was written for them, Uncle Tom was a positive figure. Flat Accord Music said, someone who would rather be comfortable and safe than do what is right. I would agree with that, Flat Accord Music, because to him, doing what was right was not breaking the law, and the law of the land was to obey your slave master, and so that's what he did. The Bible has nothing to do, or the perversion of the Bible has nothing to do with anything. Slaves weren't even allowed to read the Bible. Maximum, that's a stretch, right? Sambo is a proper noun, it's a name, right? So it's a proper noun, it's a name of a character in a book. And badly legged or bow-legged isn't necessarily have anything to do with the character that was in that book, but like, I do appreciate that you did that research, though. I'm gonna roll with you on that one. I appreciate that you did that research, but I'm not so sure. Suburban Homestead Outfitter said, Uncle Tom is a word whites were allowed to say as well. It's a safe N-word. I agree. Sigma said, I encourage everyone to listen to Malcolm's words throughout the years. Yeah, like I said, moving forward, I'm going to be doing video clips and audio clips of various Black leaders. I really want to do video clips because I hear a lot of people talk about what we cannot accomplish as a community. And I want to be clear, in the period of time in that timeline that I've been going over and over these past few videos, from the 70s into the early 80s, there was a period of time where we stopped being Uncle Toms as a people. We stopped trying to take the peaceful route as a people. There was a period of time where they would have us on television and we would openly be talking about forceful revolution to white people. And white people were talking back to us on television with how they felt about that. There was a time where there was honest dialogue in this country, but it became scary when 100,000 Black people stood together talking about being armed and yelling Black power and things of that nature. It became a scary thing, the way China is a scary thing. And when that was happening globally, they worked very hard to push drugs into the community and start locking up Black men and infiltrating organizations to destroy that movement. However, I think a lot of us don't understand the scope of how unified our people were for a period of about 15 to 20 years. It is an awesome thing to see. And again, back to my revolution, my series on social revolution. Revolutions happen in waves, right? They happen in waves. They stir up, and then the status quo pushes them down. And then they stir up. It's kind of like a baby walking. They take a few steps, they fall. The next day, they take a few more steps, they fall. They start holding on to things to help them walk. Eventually, they're walking and then they're running. And social revolutions are the same way. Be them socio-political, right? Or not. But that's essentially how they happen. Do I advocate violence? Define advocate violence. I think that the Bible says there's a time to embrace and there's a time to refrain from embracing. There's a time to kill, right? And there's a time to lay down the sword. Do I advocate violence? Our government advocates violence. Do we not fight wars? Do people not get killed in wars? So do I advocate violence? I advocate violence as much as our military advocates violence. I advocate use of force when force is needed. If I think all American people do, right? Or we wouldn't have a standing military. We wouldn't right now have people fighting wars and killing people and being killed as we speak. So to ask me if I advocate violence is a strange question when this world advocates violence, right? The world advocates it. Am I pro-war? It depends on the war, right? It depends on the war. I'm not for any of the wars our country is fighting right now. But I think war has a purpose. I don't think it can be avoided. We had a civil war in this country, didn't we? War has a purpose. It would be disingenuous to say that war did not serve a purpose. It serves a purpose. Flat accord music, often that happens. Often the elite insert things to destroy revolutions, and often they don't. Things become corrupt, and sometimes things are usurped. Sambo, where did it appear, and in what context? Because I speak of it in the context that was presented in that book and the character that was in that book that was written by a particular person. Where else did it appear? And in what context? Would be my question to you, Maximum. How could I not be familiar with the military industrial complex, Sigma Wolf? I agree. The stronger the code, the less things will be usurped. But let's be clear. China is going strong and they have a huge population. So to say that a mindset and people don't know how to stay on code, they know how to stay on code. People stay on code all the time. White people are on code, right? But there has to be a willingness there. And more importantly, there has to be collective force, that there has to be a collectivizing of like-minded people. So anyway, you guys, I will be coming live again today because I have a function today. And so I'll probably come and chit chat with you guys for something chill because I feel like everything's been so heavy for a while, right? So war does equal profit, Sigma Wolf, but war also equals freedom, right? War equals freedom and revolution and progress when the peons exact it, and war means profit when the status quo and leaders exact it. So that could be what it is, right? So yeah, I will. There's a reason George Zimmerman is walking around. I agree. That's because the world is full of Sambos and Uncle Toms. Everybody's passive. I'm going to play for the people in the room. I hope you guys will stay and I hope you guys will listen. I'm going to play Brother Malcolm X's speech one more time before I close this live out. It's about 10 minutes long. Please listen to it and consider what we discussed in this discussion, because I think he words it in a way that we can understand very clearly. So I'm going to go ahead and play it. It's about 10 minutes long. Again, please try to listen through to it. Pay attention to what he's saying, and then just marinate on it until we talk to each other again. You know, just marinate on the thought process.
Concerning the difference between the Black Revolution and the Negro Revolution. There's a difference. Are they both the same? And if they're not, what is the difference? What is the difference between a Black Revolution and a Negro Revolution? First, what is a revolution? Sometimes I'm inclined to believe that many of our people are using this word revolution loosely, without taking careful consideration what this word actually means and what its historic characteristics are. When you study the historic nature of revolutions, the motive of a revolution, the objective of a revolution, and the result of a revolution, and the methods used in a revolution, you may change words. You may devise another program. You may change your goal and you may change your mind. Look at the American Revolution in 1776. That revolution was for what? For land. How was it? Why did they want land? Independence. How was it carried out? Bloodshed. Number one, it was based on land, the basis of independence. And the only way they could get it was bloodshed. The French Revolution, what was it based on? The landless against the landlord. What was it for? Land. How did they get it? Bloodshed. Was no love lost. Was no compromise. Was no negotiation. I'm telling you, you don't know what a revolution is. Because when you find out what it is, you'll get back in the alley. you'll get out of the way. The Russian Revolution, what was it based on? Land. The landless against the landlord. How did they bring it about? Bloodshed. You haven't got a revolution that doesn't involve bloodshed. And you're afraid to bleed. I said you're afraid to bleed. Long as the white man sent you to Korea, you bled. He sent you to Germany, you bled. He sent you to the South Pacific to fight the Japanese, you bled. You bleed for white people. But when it comes time to seeing your own churches being bombed and little black girls murdered, you haven't got no blood. You bleed when the white man says bleed. You bite when the white man says bite. And you bark when the white man says bark. I hate to say this about us, but it's true. How you gonna be nonviolent in Mississippi as violent as you were in Korea? How can you justify being nonviolent in Mississippi and Alabama when your churches are being bombed and your little girls are being murdered, and at the same time you're gonna get violent with Hitler and Tojo and somebody else that you don't even know? If violence is wrong in America, violence is wrong abroad. If it's wrong to be violent, defending black women and black children and black babies and black men, then it's wrong for America to draft us and make us violent abroad in defense of her. The Chinese Revolution. They wanted land. They threw the British out, along with the Uncle Tom Chinese. Yeah, they did. They set a good example. When I was in prison, I read an article, and don't be shocked when I say I was in prison. You're still in prison. That's what America means, prison. When I was in prison, I read an article in Life magazine showing a little Chinese girl, 9 years old. Her father was on his hands and knees, and she was pulling the trigger because he was an Uncle Tom in China. When they had the revolution over there, they took a whole generation of Uncle Toms, just wiped them out. And within 10 years, that little girl became a full-grown woman. No more Toms in China. And today is one of the toughest, roughest, most feared countries on this earth by the white man, because there are no Uncle Toms over there. Of all our studies, history is best qualified to reward all research. And when you see that you got problems, all you have to do is examine the historic method used all over the world by others who had problems similar to yours. And once you see how they got theirs straight, then you know how you can get yours straight. Please. There's been a revolution, a black revolution going on in Africa. In Kenya, the Mau Mau were revolutionaries. They were the ones who made the word uhuru. They were the ones who brought it to the fore. The Mau Mau, they were revolutionaries. They believed in scorched earth. They knocked everything aside that got in their path. And their revolution also was based on land, a desire for land. In Algeria, the northern part of Africa, a revolution took place. The Algerians were revolutionists. They wanted land. France offered to let them be integrated into France. They They told the France to hell with France. They wanted some land, not some France. And they engaged in a bloody battle. So I cite these various revolutions, brothers and sisters, to show you, you don't have a peaceful revolution. You don't have a turn the other cheek revolution. There's no such thing as a nonviolent revolution. Only kind of revolution that's nonviolent is the Negro revolution. The only revolution based on loving your enemy is the Negro revolution. The only revolution in which the goal is a desegregated lunch counter, a desegregated theater, a desegregated park, and a desegregated public toilets. You can sit down next to white folks on the toilet. That's no revolution. Revolution is based on land. Land is the basis of all independence. Land is the basis of freedom, justice, and equality. The white man knows what a revolution is. He knows that the black revolution is worldwide, in scope and in nature. The black revolution is sweeping Asia, sweeping Africa. It's rearing its head in Latin America. The Cuban Revolution, that's a revolution. They overturned the system. Revolution is in Asia. Revolution is in Africa. And the white man is screaming because he sees revolution in Latin America. How do you think you'll react when you learn what a real revolution is?
Okay, you guys, so that's the clip again. I don't know. I hope you'll marinate on my thought process when in this discussion about Uncle Tom's Cabin and the characters Uncle Tom and Sambo. And also the other Black characters in the book. Like I said, there was every kind of Black character in that book, except for the kind that would engage in actually fighting back, right? Every kind of Black character in that book, except for the kind that would fight back. And I just found that so fascinating. And yeah, I don't know, that's just, it's really sticking in my mind, especially as I move around and I hear the hearts of other Black people, and that's where some of us stand. So I just want to reintroduce, because I think we forget, and those are news clips people don't play over, right? I want to pull up some of these archives of speeches. I want to pull up some of these video archives so we can see. I think sometimes when we have these conversations, it's hard to visualize because many people weren't alive for that time. And I want to also look into some conversations with people who were alive from that time and how they feel now, seeing where things are now. Back then, before we had a Black president, they were talking about token Blacks. One Black person making it into a position, that there would be an endless stream of firsts, right? But never the fullness of representation. And that ties into my revolutionary revolutions series, where I talk about how the system is structured so that you're given enough representation for your satisfaction, but never enough to disrupt the regular functioning of government, right? So the people get to get in there, but not enough people to really change how things work. There's an interesting speech called, I can't remember the exact name, but it's something like voting your way in, or political progress. versus armed progress. And again, these are just conversations I want to have because I want us to think about the work people put in and their mindset at the time. And I want us to think about where we are now and like what we can actually do about it. If we're not fully satisfied with where things are, right, and we want to see them improve, then we have to look at what the mindset of the people that came before us were, what they could accomplish and did accomplish, and what they weren't able to accomplish, and then have real conversations about that. So a little bit later, y'all, like I said, I have an event tonight. I want to, if I can, sit down and just have a kind of chilled out live with you guys where we just talk to each other and you guys come upstairs and, you know, because everybody doesn't want to type, some of you can just come up and talk and we'll just, you know, nothing serious, nothing deep. You know what I mean? Just enjoying each other's company. But I want to say I really appreciate you guys talking back to me because, you know, I hate to talk at you. I like us to talk together. So I always really appreciate when you guys make comments and I can respond to you and we can communicate as best as we can, right? Online in this kind of medium. And with that said, I will talk to you guys a little bit later. Bye-bye.